Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. Tax season's here. Um, Someone once told me that the tax season begins on January 1st, and you better start doing things then rather than later. But anyway, we have with us Larry Levinson. My audience is used to me. He's going to talk about some of the things we as small businesses should do. Larry, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Really happy to be here today with you.
Well, Larry, as we ask all our guests, first tell us a little bit about yourself, then about your company, and finally a website before we get into the real meat of this program.
Sure. I'm originally from Montreal, Quebec, and have lived and worked in multiple locations across this country, throughout the US, throughout Europe. My first passion was music. I was a guitar player, going many years back to McGill University, who got tendonitis in my wrists and switched to motivational psychology and then ultimately the sciences and business management. And started my career in banking before I jumped into consumer packaged goods. Then I spent over a decade in testing, inspection, and certification. And then the past few years, SaaS. And so having worked in, so many cultures and industries and geographies, it became very clear to me throughout this entire journey that customer needs transcend all businesses, and that, the more mundane a task, the more rife it is for innovation.
Okay. You have a website?
We do. Waveapps.com.
Can you spell it out for our audience? Because some of our channels are radio.
Sure. WAVEAPPS.com.
How did you come up with that name?
So I joined Wave just over 2 years ago, 2 years and 3 months ago in November 2020 would have been election day for you guys. Wave is an accounting product first and foremost. It's a one-stop money management solution for small business owners that combines powerful money management tools with no-fee business banking built into service-based small business. So we're effectively a free accounting platform, and we have a comprehensive suite of money tools that can be used separately or together, which save business owners time while providing flexibility and control. We have products that include accounting, invoicing, payroll, payments, as well as my group, which is bookkeeping services. So Wave Apps is originally a software product. And so if you Google Wave Financial, you'll find so many different brands and entities, which I think to rise above the rest and above the noise, waveapps.com was born.
Okay. Well, before we go any further, the question I've always had for products like yours is, they're only as good as the people who use them. And do you have any thoughts of what makes the best user of such tools in terms of personality?
Well, there's two pieces to that. So number one, yes, there's some truth to that. On the other hand, I do feel it is our responsibility to make things as simple and beautiful as possible so that regardless of who you are, you're not going to be lost in a user experience with confusion and too many options and features that you don't need and that sort of thing. So that is something we strive for at Wave, is to keep things extremely simple. And when we hear from users who love the brand, that's typically why we took something very complex and made it easy. On the flip side, what makes a great user for us is one who's motivated, one who's patient. We have a mix of everybody. So we do have a lot of business owners who want to take the power into their own hands and manage their own books, file their own taxes. And then we have others who, didn't get to business so that they could spend their time doing books.
Hmm.
And so regardless of kind of which side of that fence you're on, whether you want full control or you just want to outsource the work, we have options to support those business owners.
Okay. So now, you know, I just got one of my forms to put together for my accountant. My first question is, should you have an account?
If yes, absolutely. I would highly recommend you speak with an accountant. In fact, everything we're going to talk about today um, specifically is tied to there's a lot of ways to go through the journey that ultimately ends in submitting your taxes at the end of the year. And the more advice you can have along the way, the better. And a trusted accountant, a trusted advisor is highly recommended.
Okay. Now, having gotten all of that out of the way, the floor is yours. Give us some ideas of what we should be doing.
Well, if in terms of starting with how to make the most out of available tax deductions, it all starts with accurate and detailed record keeping, and that's typically where people fall off right from the start. And often at Wave, going back to its inception, over a decade ago, we don't consider our competitor to necessarily be the QuickBooks or the FreshBooks of the world. Our competitor really is the shoebox or the glove compartment or the Ziploc bags that are stuffed into drawers, loaded with receipts that so many business owners operate by, which leads to so much unnecessary stress. You mentioned January 1st, it's tax time. You know, not all that many people follow your advice in that. And so, whatever a deadline is, typically 2 weeks or 3 weeks leading up to that deadline, they're scrambling to find receipts. They're consolidating things out of the big George Costanza wallet, that kind of stuff. So it all starts with accurate and detailed record keeping. So no matter what the deduction is, if your records are inaccurate, the tax authorities could deny those deductions, given that the burden of proof is going to be on the taxpayer. So failure to produce those detailed records or support when requested will usually just result in a denial of those deductions. So I'd say start there. Find a platform to keep things organized. Is probably the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is avoid mixing personal and business expenses, which is another thing that, in terms of financial hygiene, a lot of folks forget to do. They have one credit card and they just push everything through it. Again, which leads to a headache when it comes tax time of highlighting, Visa receipts and bank statements and trying to figure out what was appropriate as a business expense and what wasn't. So knowing the personal expenses are not deductible, they should be separated.
Well, that's good advice. Many of us don't do that in smaller companies, but keep on going. You're on a roll.
All right. In terms of business expenses themselves, and they're defined as needing to be reasonable, ordinary, and necessary to earn business outcome. They can't be lavish. They can't be extravagant. You can't go out for a $200 lunch in $300 lunch with, fancy champagne in the interest of business development, right? And those kind of things. So there is caution and care that needs to have specifically around prohibited things like that, to avoid fines or penalties or audits. And also
Larry,
knowing that,
can I interrupt you and ask you about one? I know you're not an accountant, but we went to a wedding 2 weeks ago, and there were 400 people at the wedding, and 200, at least 200 of them were business people for this wedding. Uh, and the guy was saying, "I'm going to write it off." Dude, does that really happen, or do people just say that?
who's going to write it off?
The
The person.
father of the bride who paid for the wedding.
Yeah, well, he should consult a very good accountant, first and foremost. But yeah, I think that one might be a little bit of a stretch.
Well, yeah, I thought that, but I subsequently went and looked, and it turned out that a lot of people do claim it as a business expense because they have business people there.
Right.
So, you
Uh,
know,
Again, I think it all needs to come back to reasonableness, and what is reasonable, what is ordinary, and what is necessary to earn a business outcome. To stand before a tax authority and say that in order, it was necessary to earn this income, this lavish wedding that I threw and invited 400 people to, and served, caviar and smoked salmon, and we had a roast beef station, and we had the finest of wines and all, that might be a little bit of a stretch, again back to lavishness and extravagance.
look,
um
I'm
if
sorry to interrupt you, but it's one.
no, listen, these are great stories, and I imagine if you yourself, let's say you went to the wedding as a guest and your travel expenses were something that might be considered reasonable, ordinary, and necessary to earn your income. If you were there at that wedding in the interest of business development, perhaps there's more of an argument to be made there. But again, that's where I'd want a really good, experienced accountant in front of me before I claim that.
Well, in this case, it was my publisher, and I thought it would behoove me to be
Right.
there.
Yes, good idea. Um, and again, I mean, like the definition of ordinary expense is one that's common and accepted in your industry. So if you're in the business of weddings, perhaps there's some, within that context that may make a little bit more sense. Is, and if you're a wedding planner yourself, your job is to go see what is the latest and greatest of weddings. Maybe there's something there, but again, going back to what's necessary and appropriate, always keep that in the back of your mind.
Mhm. Anyway, please, I don't, well, I'm not sorry I interrupted you, but please continue.
No, very good. So yeah, hire a reputable tax preparer and keep accurate details of your expenses to allow that preparer to maximize your deductions. Um, Kind of some of the more uncommon things, like in no particular order, um, home office expenses are commonly overlooked, although probably in the last 3 years, people are much more aware of what home office expenses mean. But there is some caution that needs to be had there as well, because it's very clear that those office expenses need to be an exclusive area of your home or your business, that do not have another principal place. You can't be sitting in your living room with your big TV, sitting on your couch, um, and expensing your Super Bowl television set in the interest of a home office expense, that kind of thing. So, you can deduct the business use of the percentage of the home, home office square feet divided by the total square footage of your home, and then using that ratio for property expenses, including mortgage interest and real estate taxes, utilities, that kind of thing. But um, it needs to be an exclusive area in your home, only used for business.
What about leasing your car?
Yeah, well, leasing a car, again, depending on the purpose of the vehicle. So business use of personal vehicles, again, back to good record keeping. So mileage tracking is strongly recommended. Things are a lot easier if you actually lease a vehicle exclusively for work. So as someone who's been in sales most of my career, we always had two cars. One was kind of my wife, and for the family, that was our personal use. And whenever I drove to see customers, I had one vehicle that was basically, 95 to 100% for business, um, and kept meticulous logs, of all the mileage to get to and from customers and that sort of thing. So, if you can exclusively use your vehicle for business use, fantastic. If you're going to use one vehicle for both personal and business, then just keep really good records on what you were using it and when, so that at the end of the year you can divide the business use divided by total mileage and track it that way.
Hmm. What do you do? Keep on going. You have some more for us?
Donation goods.
Oh,
So, that's one that people often overlook. So, while cash is king, you can take a tax deduction for donating goods. Again, you just need proof of fair market value donated. So, if you're going to drop something valuable off at a charity, get a receipt, and that way you have your, again, back to keeping good records. You have those records in place.
well, the interesting thing is we use three different uh, charities, including Goodwill, but all they do is just give us a thing and say, you fill it out. They give us a piece of, you're sitting there saying, well, what can I do?
Right.
And the guy, and if the auditor looks at it, it's the same signature on all three.
Right. So yes, in that case, you have God as your witness. So of what you donated and
And
what the fair market
sometimes I'm
value
not
of that
so
was.
sure about him
Right.
or her.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. Um, so yeah, that's a good one. And then for flow through entities such as sole proprietorships, S corps, active income partnerships, there are up to 20% of qualified business income deductions. So, that's something that you have exclusively in the US that we don't here in Canada. And then I mentioned mortgage interest earlier as well. That's a good one, right? So
you
uh,
know, here in the United States, we're limited on deductions personally to 10%. Does that, I've always wondered, does the 10% plus the mortgage deduction or the mortgage deduction is inside the 10%?
that's a very good question. I don't want to misspeak on that one. Again, if assuming the mortgage deduction um, is going to be claimed under the business expense section, then I think it would be on top of it. If you're talking strictly personally, then good question for an accountant.
Well, believe me, I use my account all the time. But
That's
but
good.
but let me ask you this question: what happens when that dreaded audit comes?
Mhm.
Our audit letter comes. What should you do?
First thing, do not ignore it. As in, and I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but it's way too uncommon that folks will see a letter from the IRS show up in the mail, and it's like, yeah, especially right now, third week of January, right? We're coming out of the bluest, most depressing time of the year. Everyone's energy is kind of sucked and sapped. Like the headlines are terrible. I wouldn't say this is the most inspiring time of the year. And so people see something like that and they're just like, man, I'm not opening this now because I can't handle one more bit of bad news. And literally 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, it's still sitting on their desk and they're just not facing what could be on the other side. So my advice would be open it as quickly as possible, um, and see what they're looking for. Hopefully, you have again back to record keeping, whatever your claims may have been, to be able to. I think this is where the advantage of tracking things in the cloud or through like a Google Drive could be, or take snapshots of your receipts on your phone and upload those to a drive and organize it as much as you can. If you're not going to use a platform like Wave, if you're going to use a platform like Wave, then the job should be done. As in, you can go back, your expenses are categorized, you should be able to find your records and without too much sweat, be able to provide whatever you need to support those claims.
Good advice. Um, Let me ask you this question. What about what kind of an accountant should you be choosing? I mean, do you have any advice? This was brought up to me Sunday at a party that how should you choose an accountant and an accounting software, software like yours? Well, we'll start with the accountant first and then go to yours.
Sure. I think there's nothing stronger than a referral, as in, if within your network, you mentioned going to the wedding of your producer, if your producer has an accountant and you work with each other closely and you trust each other and roughly each other's industries, and someone is vouching for this individual. There's a lot of there's a lot of credibility behind that endorsement of someone who's gone through a lot with this individual, and so forth. If you're reaching out to someone off the street, or something like that, this is kind of the power of the internet. You can Google people's names, you can look for referrals, you can look for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it ties into the software piece as well. You want to read that other users had a good experience with the brand, that there's some history and credibility behind it, that things like data security are really very important. And so if you're going to work with a company like Wave, that that whatever data you're entering to the system, which may be sensitive, is secured and safe, and not something you need to worry about. That more and more these days, that's something people often worry about, is you're sharing very sensitive information with an unknown party through the internet, and you just want to make sure that it's not going to bite you in the ass later.
On your website again for our audience?
Wave Apps, WAVEAPPS.com.
You've been around a while. What are some of the things that people don't do that you've seen that you feel they? You mentioned some, but what do you think are the one or two top things people don't do that they should do?
Honestly, the biggest one, and we all do it, right? We all have that glove compartment filled with gas receipts, and those receipts over time fade away and just become a nightmare to grab come tax prep time. So, like if your listeners walk away with two things from this conversation, if one is to either sign up for a platform or just get a spreadsheet going to keep more meticulous logs of things they want to track throughout the year, that would be number one. And number two is, again, separating business and personal expenses. Like, it's so simple, but we get busy in life, and we often don't want to go to the bank and just set up one more account. But by setting up that other account, remembering this Visa I use only for the business, or this debit card I use only for the business, everything else is personal. That little decision is going to save you just tons of grief when it comes tax times to go through all your transactions.
Well, one more time, your website?
Waveapps.com.
Okay. Now, Larry, you have the floor. What would you like to leave our audience with?
I'd say, I obviously check out waveapps.com. And, part of the reason I love working for Wave, in all sincerity, is that, we're a very purpose-driven organization whose sole mission is to believe in the small business owner. And there's not a lot of companies out there that are solely focused on the small business owner, or really the micro business owner, who is, one individual with either a side hustle or a small business. And, really our mission is to help empower that person. And so, when I say free accounting platform, it is actually entirely free. We have a lot of free resources. I can send you the link if you want to connect with our tax starter guide, kind of some financial hygiene tips and checklists to be aware of on come tax time. There's a lot of indispensable knowledge there. And I think that a big part of the challenge with this industry in general is just accessibility to information. And small business owners, not like, back to that point around referral and credibility, not knowing who to reach out to, and that creating a lot of fear and in not wanting to get it wrong. So at the very least, go to a website like Waves, take a look at all the free resources that are there, that's presented in as simply a way as possible to help get people on the right track. And if there's any questions, reach out to the team.
Well, on that note, Larry, we're going to say thank you. I learned a lot. I hope that our audience did as well. Thanks for a very illuminating time.
Oh, thank you, Don. This was great.